Yes, so today we're honored to be joined by three wonderful guests, Polina Polikarpova, Ruven Stube, and Andriy Zinchenko. So we will hear from each of our speakers, followed by a short Q&A, and then we will open the floor for a broader discussion. So first of all, I would like to introduce our artist for today. It's Polina Polikarpova. So Polina is the photographer from Kharkiv, but she is based in Kyiv. And Polina is an independent photographer collaborating with Ukrainian and international media in parallel with her artistic practice. During the 2010s, combining the role of photographer and costume designer in one person, Polina models images and scenes in the outskirts of her native Kharkiv, focusing on its local poetics. The characteristic of Polina's style is the creation of compositions here and now. She's prone toward post-colonial interiors of residential apartments of brutal urban landscapes as opposed to an artificial studio environment. Since the beginning of the 2020s, Polina has focused on two cities, Kharkiv and Kyiv, where she finds inspiration and tries to find commonalities. Polina uses flannery as a method of finding new locations, engaging in a restrained survey of the depersonalized landscape in different seasons and weather conditions.
Hello everyone, my name is Polina Polikarpova, an independent photographer from Kharkiv, but recently based in Kyiv. I am presenting to you my self-portrait called Ray of Light, made especially for home project that was commissioned by Cultural Liverpool for the Eurovision Cultural Festival 2023, supported by Open Eye Gallery. You see the 16-story block building during the planned power outage, but in the center of the image there is my tiny self-portrait looking straight to the camera from the window, holding a flash LED light, like this. That was January 2023, during the blackouts in Kyiv and the rest of the Ukraine that winter. I strictly remember that feeling that when you walk down the street and observe the houses where the lights goes off, you try to guess how certain people light up their homes. Whether candles or battery-powered LED lamps like mine are bought on the market or ordered online or elsewhere. I have created my comfort zone in my apartment. When I turn it off, I mostly use a powerful RGB LED lamp that freely changes saturation and color. Depending on my mood, I change colors to one or another. That evening on this picture had no light for a long time, I think more than 3 hours, maybe 5 or 6. So January melancholy saved me, so I chose blue color for this picture. Thank you so much for the attention. I hope that you enjoyed my picture. So thank you so much and have a nice day. Bye.
It is my privilege to introduce our first guest, Ruven Stube. So Ruven is an energy economist and economic policy consultant at Berlin Economics. He is involved with a project titled Advising Ukrainian Decision Makers on Low Emission Policy Paths, funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Ruven earned a multidisciplinary bachelor's degree in political science, economics, and Middle East studies at Sciences Po Paris, after which he completed a master's degree in economics with a focus on environmental and energy economics at the Toulouse School of Economics. His expertise lies in the area of techno-economic electricity and heat system modeling, integration of renewable energies, sector coupling, CO2 pricing energy market reforms, and cross-sectoral decarbonization strategies.
So I will briefly talk about Ukraine's electricity system during the war and trying to give a little retrospective on the last 2 years of of resistance with a focus on the electricity system, of course, and also kind of a state of play, a status quo, and maybe also a little outlook on this coming winter. So here we go. So where are we currently? So the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe with about 6 gigawatts of installed generation capacity, remains occupied by the Russian invaders. All other 3 nuclear power plants are operational. Actually, all 9 units at these 3 plants are currently up and running, producing electricity. And when we talk about thermal power plants, so Ukraine mostly has coal-fired thermal power plants, some of which can also switch to natural gas. The availability of these power plants is significantly reduced. First of all, quite a few plants are in occupied territories. Some also have suffered damages from the war, missile attacks or drone attacks. Some close to the front line also artillery shelling damages. DTEC, the largest privately owned operator of thermal power plants, has repaired all planned 20 units, whereas Centrenergo, the largest state-owned operator of thermal power plants, has made significantly fewer repairs, and also there's a problem of availability of coal at some power plants. So actually, some of these thermal power plants have currently switched to operating on natural gas, which of course is significantly more expensive. The state-owned hydropower operator Ukrenergo has performed all plant maintenance works on the power plants. However, the Kakhovka dam, of course, remains destroyed since the summer and is not available for electricity generation. When we look at the variable renewables, wind and solar, actually a large share of these generation capacities, renewable generation capacities, are located in occupied territories. And also there's one additional problem with the payment for these renewable generators. So the green tariff, the feed-in tariff in Ukraine, has not consistently been paid, at least not to the full extent, to these operators due to budget constraints, of course, but also due to a series of accumulated debt in the electricity system between different actors. So the guaranteed buyer, the entity that's supposed to pay this green tariff to the operators, has in turn also debt which it's owed by other entities in the system, Ukrenergo, the grid operator, and Energoatom, the nuclear state-owned operator. And there's basically a series of debt, a chain of debt between different operators in the system that is creating this problem and a few other problems as well. When we look at the grids, Ukrenergo has performed all planned maintenance work on the high voltage transmission lines. However, the grid does remain vulnerable to attacks, especially on high voltage lines and transformers. So overall, until now, Russia has destroyed or damaged almost 50% of generating capacities. This sounds like a staggering number. We have to remind ourselves that before the war, Ukraine actually had quite a lot of overcapacities in the system. So this does not mean that 50% of electricity is now missing. But still, this is a significantly reduced availability of generation capacities. And furthermore, actually, a very critical problem for this winter or going forward in general is the reduced availability of spare parts. So especially some specialized equipment, grid equipment, auto transformers, etc., technical equipment that's needed to operate the grid. The availability of spare parts is almost depleted in Ukraine, but also in the partner countries that are supporting Ukraine for some of these equipment. Especially when we think about the ultra high voltage equipment, for example, Ukraine, due to the Soviet legacy, has 750 kilovolt lines, which do not exist in a lot of other Western countries. So actually, it's very hard to procure this specialized equipment, which is needed to repair parts of the grid. So overall, there is a high vulnerability to missile and drone attacks. On the other hand, Ukraine does have better air defense now than it had last winter. And also, there has been some work to protect some of the really critical parts of the system with reinforced concrete structures, or sometimes also simpler measures, sandbags, anti-drone nets, etc. But still, overall, we think that there is a high vulnerability to missile and drone attacks, and unfortunately, possible outages might be similar to the outages levels that we have seen last winter. I hope that I will be proven wrong, but that's what we expect at least. One thing to mitigate outages, next to repairing generation capacities in the country, is imports, of course. So here we can have a look at the import and export capacities and the development of this throughout the last year or year and a half, actually. So since June 2022, when commercial imports were first allowed in an agreement between ENTSO-E, the Association of Grid Operators in Europe, and the Ukrainian grid operator, there has been a significant increase in import capacities. So since the beginning of the emergency synchronization, which we have talked about last year, there was technical capacity to import, so power lines that were existing of about 1.5 to 2 gigawatts, but not all of these power lines could have actually been used because of some constraints in the operation of the grid system, static and dynamic stability of the synchronized grid. And with continued efforts to improve the static and dynamic stability of the synchronized system, it was possible to step-by-step increase actually both import and export capacities. So now about 1,200 megawatt import capacity is available if needed, which is more than, for example, one large nuclear reactor. And this can, of course, to some extent help mitigate outages. There are some challenges associated with this. One is the Ukrainian wholesale electricity market. So the Ukrainian wholesale electricity market still has price caps in the market, so maximum prices that can be which can be bid and agreed on in the wholesale market, and this makes commercial imports in many times quite economically unattractive. This is because the electricity wholesale market prices in neighboring EU countries, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, sometimes, or actually oftentimes, are higher. So the price in these markets is higher than these price caps in the Ukrainian market. So it's then not an attractive business model to buy electricity in these countries as a commercial electricity trader and import it to Ukraine, because it cannot be sold at a price that makes sense for these imports. There is the option of emergency imports. So directly buying electricity as, for example, through the grid operator to balance the system. However, emergency imports are much more expensive, between 1.3 and 2 times as expensive as commercial imports. And this is related to the fact that if emergency imports are procured or are needed, usually fast ramping gas power plants need to start up quickly, and electricity production from these peaker plants is more expensive than buying electricity on the wholesale market. And also, it's noteworthy to see that the export capacity in last winter has been suspended throughout the winter. So it remains to be seen whether this measure needs to be taken again this winter, or whether electricity exports can continue, or at least can be allowed, if economically attractive, to continue throughout the winter. Here we see, this is actually a picture from last winter on electricity supply interruptions in Ukraine. This is the example of Kiev for one exemplary week in January. So this is the scheduled outage, or grid outage schedule. So planned outages. And these outages lasted from about 4 to 7 hours, usually with an overall outage level of 70%. So this means actually only in 30% of the time electricity was available in Kiev in January this year. And then on top of that, sometimes there were random unpredictable emergency outages due to attacks on the transmission or distribution grid. So quite a drastic picture that we have seen last winter. And we have talked about imports. Another topic that is being discussed quite substantively is distributed energy generation and storage. So the Russian attacks on the energy infrastructure, we do think, underline the need to at least partially transition to a more decentralized energy system to improve resilience and reduce vulnerability to such attacks. The electricity outages do affect all parts of civilian lives, of course, including education. More than 5 million children are with limited educational access, especially in winter during outages when school is interrupted from interrupted electricity supply. And one possible solution to mitigate these outages is to use distributed energy sources. So I'm going to give you a brief example from a recent study that we have produced, where we looked to find the cost optimal mix of distributed energy sources for one representative school in Kiev. So this is now not looking at the whole country, but an example of one school in Kiev. But I mean, some of the results can be generalized for other examples as well. So we took the actual electricity demand from the school, and then we looked at different technology options to supply electricity besides grid electricity, where we assumed interruptions reflecting the typical length and frequency of these grid outages last winter. We also looked at the options of diesel generators and then solar PV panels with batteries. And basically what we have found is, before I'll get to what we found, just briefly summarizing the scenarios. So we designed 3 scenarios, one where there's only diesel generators supplementing the grid electricity. Then there's only solar PV and battery storage, and then a cost optimal big mix of these 2 or 3 technologies. And basically what we have found is that a cost optimal mix is one where we have 25 kilowatts of diesel generators. So this is, of course, only for one school. So these numbers are for one supplying electricity for one school, 26 kilowatt of solar PV panels, and then about 130 kilowatt hours of battery storage. And if we look at the graph at the bottom, the generation shares, we see that solar panels is supplying around 40% of the energy needs. The grid, when available, is supplying another 43%, and then the diesel generators are mainly acting as a backup, only producing electricity when electricity is neither from the grid nor from the solar panels plus batteries enough available. And we do find that installation of solar PV panels and batteries is actually economical, even under current low regulated electricity tariffs and the absence of carbon pricing, etc., in these conditions. So to mitigate grid outages. Just briefly, I'm not going to go over all these points here, but of course, investment costs for solar PV panels and battery storage is much higher than for diesel generators. The installation costs a lot more, but then there are savings over the lifetime of these assets, as diesel generators, of course, need diesel fuel to run, whereas the operational costs for batteries and solar PV panels is relatively low. So the investment cost is much higher, but the total costs or total annual costs is actually lower in a system with solar panels and batteries, just because of these operational savings of diesel fuel. So in both scenarios with solar PV batteries and solar PV panels and batteries, the operational savings are higher than the upfront, or outweigh the upfront investment costs over the lifetime of these assets. So in conclusion, Ukraine's electricity grid has withstood large-scale targeted attacks. The grid has actually proved remarkably resistant in the last 2 years. However, the system is in a relatively critical state going into this winter. Russia has destroyed and damaged almost 50% of the generating capacities And there's this problem of a lower availability of spare parts for some grid equipment. Imports can mitigate some generation deficits. However, price caps limit the economic attractiveness of commercial imports, and continuous electricity market reform is needed to achieve a deeper market integration between Ukraine's electricity market and the European Union electricity markets. And also distributed energy generation and storage can mitigate outages for critical infrastructure, also for public services, as the example of the school has shown, or also for residential consumers. And solar PV panels and batteries are, in many cases, not in all cases, actually economical to mitigate these outages. And more generally, decentralized renewables can bring the benefits of reduced vulnerability to energy infrastructure attacks. They also provide reduced dependency on price volatile fossil fuels. And also they have an added economic value in the future if continued energy and climate policy reform is pursued. So if Ukraine, through the EU accession process, undertakes tariff reform, market liberalization, carbon pricing in the future, then the value of these assets will be increased in the future. And also, of course, these are first steps towards building a modern and green energy system for Ukraine. So thanks a lot for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ruben, for this very insightful talk. And I think we can now go to our second speaker, and then in the end of the presentations, we'll have a general Q&A, followed by broader discussions. So now it is my privilege to introduce our second guest, Andriy Zinchenko. Andriy is a co-founder of Ukrainian Energy Innovations Network, Green Incubator, as well as founder of Ukraine's first solar energy cooperative, Solar Town. And since 2014, Andriy is focusing his public advocacy efforts on the areas of DER, distributed energy resources, democratizing Ukraine's energy market, promoting community energy projects, microgrids, protecting the rights of independent energy market players. Andriy, please take it away. Yes, we can.
So thank you so much for inviting to this discussion. And sorry, I'm without a presentation again. I'm participating in some training to be prepared, to the tough war times. Many Ukrainians are going to these all kind of military trainings every day, just to be ready. So, but I'll try to convey my thoughts as clearly and as concisely as I can. So what I would like to pinpoint in the context of our discussion is that Ukraine is a country of legacy monopolies. In fact, Ukraine is a country of energy monopolies, and which is very important. The most important point when you hear that Ukraine is the country of energy monopolies, do not listen to anyone who says something about oligarchs, because in our internal discussion in Ukraine, there is so much talk about notorious oligarchs like Rinat Akhmetov, who is definitely notorious, who have control over Ukrainian energy. But if we just take the official statistics, it is the state companies who are absolute monopolists in terms of electricity production. So it is 74% of electricity which is produced in our country by the state monopoly. So why the electricity market is so bad? Because it is state-owned, let's say. Of course, we have a major parts, I would say the majority of our distribution companies are owned by mostly oligarchs. That's true. So, and up until recently, that was including Russian oligarchs, some of them having Ukrainian passports, ironically, but anyway. Now, Ukrainian state has seized many of the assets in the distribution systems. Distribution systems meaning the network operators who deliver the electricity to the residential sector and to the enterprises. So the picture is very interesting, but what I'm trying to tell here is that the system we have is a result of 30 years of evolution of independent Ukraine after we had this legacy Soviet system, and the Soviet Union was, I remind you, the totalitarian state. So we had in 30s and 40s, we had many distributed generation, much of distributed generations, really thousands of local generation points, and then they were wiped out just because the totalitarian state could replicate only things which are very centralized, especially in things in areas such critical as energy. So in 1991, as we became independent, we got this legacy old, very super centralized system, which was a chunk of the old Soviet system. Then later we had Ukrenergo, and despite it is in state-owned energy companies, the transmission grid operator, I must tell it is one of the most capable group of people, although is state-owned, and most of the state-owned companies are inefficient by design. But in case of Ukrenergo, they are doing many good things, and they made pretty good work last year in terms of recovering the energy system. But truth be told, there were a lot of help from international partners, and thank for them, and from many private structures who would not advertise their participation. So this grid is designed as over-centralized command and control one. And when we talk about the market in Ukraine, energy market, I wouldn't be so sure to talk about the market as a very competitive one. So there is not much of competition really. And moreover, there is a problem when these state enterprise, they have this social function and they want to expand. For example, Energoatom suddenly wants to expand in a neighboring market of a chargers for electric automobiles, and suddenly they want to become a bigger monopoly. So that's clearly a problem. Again, a big hydro company called Ukrhydroenergo, they are using the loopholes in our laws to get the funds from international financial organizations like World Bank to install storages for themselves. And that means that efficiently they are killing the balancing market, which could be a next big market and make Ukrainian energy system more healthier. But anyway, so these enterprises, all of them want to expand, but they are state-owned, and that means they are pretty much trying to limit or kill the competition. But if we take a look at this centralized system, they have one common thing. They have their strength. I mean, they can be controlled by a single unity like Ukrenergo, and the decision maybe can be made quite quickly in the terms of war chaos, in times of war chaos and crisis. But they have this one major issue, and this one major issue is called single point of failure, meaning that there is a very limited number of points which can be bombed or destroyed, and the system falls off. In the Bible, there is this saying that when I kill the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. That's actually the definition of the point of failure. So when we had this last year bombing of our energy system, there was so much talk and fuss about that we need to decentralize the energy system. Unfortunately, most of this talk and fuss and this internal discussion was not really qualified. But I don't want this to look like gloom and doom. In fact, we have very interesting development, because even before the war, we had these 60,000 of households who installed their solar power plants, and this was all stimulated by the household feed-in tariff. So they were well stimulated, and theoretically, all of them, when the grid is down, could become really we call the places where we have heat and light for like guaranteed the points of unbreakability. So they could be this 60. Can you imagine 60,000 is quite a large number when we talk about the country. Can you imagine if they would supply energy to their neighbors to allow at least to charge the devices, the mobile phones? But I guess like 90 to 95% of those power plants, they were equipped, they had a technical problem. They could not work without the grid because their inverters were just normal grid inverters, not the hybrid or autonomous inverters. And that means they would need to invest like 1/3 of a station cost in order to make them autonomous. So I repeat this is very ironic. We had this 60,000 of power plants distributed up to each of them up to 30 kilowatts of power, but they can only work when the grid works. So either the state should help these people, maybe provide some 0% financing so that to create this grid of resilient homeowners, or they should themselves pay for this and just provide themselves the energy they need. Moreover, but this is only part of them. The vendors of the equipment and the installers of the equipment, of the notably solar and solar equipment and accumulators, at the start of the war, they have seen their sales going to zero in just a couple of days. So their business was pretty much stopped. But during the fall of last winter, their business jumped up. They have seen the level of demand, which was unthinkable before the war. So after Russia started bombing our energy system, we have seen the solar renaissance. So if the first wave of solar installation in Ukraine was pretty much supported by green tariff, the second wave was even more important because this was the wave of first the citizens who wanted just to have solar power and some battery. I'm one of them. I bought a large battery for my parents' house so that they wouldn't be without light. And then there is even a third wave, and this third wave is not residential. Now we have a big renaissance of a big tendency in Ukraine when large companies, I mean like large, big, fat corporates, are installing, of course, those who have large rooftops, they are installing solar power on the rooftops, including a very well-known epicenter, which is like epicenter. It's like place. It's a supermarket where you can buy anything related to building and not only to construction and not only construction. So each of these supermarkets has really, I guess it's dozens of thousands of square meters of roofs. So they have recently claimed, and they started the work on that they will replace 30% of their consumption with solar. It's a very large number indeed. Another large company, Roshen, a major producer and exporter of the sweets, they have announced the similar plans. So they are now implementing similar things. Moreover, companies who are working in the agricultural field, they are now keen to go into energy for the several reasons. For example, we have MHP, Mironivsky Hliboprodukt company, which is really the largest exporter to EU, the largest poultry exporter to EU. The point is that they have a whole plan and they attracted financing for building biomethane plants. And the company, I talked to the executives of the company, they are very prone to creating their own system, which would be so much self-reliant. But not only them, can you imagine during the war last year, this year, this spring, we had first Ukrainian biomethane plant constructed. And that's also a major addition to this distributed thing. So why it's important? Because during the war, without any financing from the state, without any guarantees from the international donors, we have a company, agricultural company, who is doing a very advanced energy asset. We understand that this development is not due to the characteristic of Ukrainian market, but rather to European market, because all these agri producers, they are keen to sell the biomethane, which is advanced, a very advanced energy product, to EU. But even more than that, since we have CBAM, which is upcoming to Ukraine, and many businesses understand that this EU Green Deal, they don't quite understand what the hell is EU Green Deal. But their financial managers understand that they need to lower their carbon embedded into their product. So they are interested in clean energy. So, how much time do I have left? Sorry.
You have several minutes.
Okay, and then this is the private sector. So the private sector is booming with renewables just to supply themselves and just to stabilize themselves. But then what the state really does, overall, the state policy is abysmal because it's much of populism and bragging, about the social responsibility and so on and so on, the things that are pretty much killing the private markets. But there are some steps which were made the right way. For example, one of them is a direct electricity sales. We have recently seen the adoption of the legal changes which allow neighbors, be it businesses or residential, to sell each other electricity without license. I think it's a major step. I hope this will be developing because it's very important because it helps to develop the DER, distributed energy resources. Then there is this issue of small distribution system, which is really a microgrid. In 2017, several of my friends and me, we have lobbied for a small distribution system, which is a legal term for microgrids, which would be a very very light in terms of administration way for private grids to be operated. But this year, the state decided that this is a good idea to add licensing to them. So now the state wants to license the private grids. So can you imagine this? You have an enterprise grid, and suddenly there comes the state who would want you to license your grid, which is a very bad idea. But still, the instrument exists, and this is important. And this is important in the following context. I think if we want to, we are often talking about this idea of integrating into EU market and having all this big market. But I think we should complement this idea with the idea that we will not have a single market. We will have the multi-market system, and the idea that in these small networks, small grids, we can have markets with their own relations, with their own participants, I think is pretty sound. And it is very important to understand that trying to build a too much centralized system will create complexities that will let's say, create problems for us. I think we should complement the fluidity and liquidity of the overall great idea of European market with the local markets, which would be existing in these local grids. And you may say that I'm talking about very, let's say, theoretical things, but no. Only in the region where I'm located, it's Kyiv region, it's a capital region, we have over 1,000 of private grids. These private grids belong to the condominiums, not the city condominiums, you know, to the cottage, to the little cottage towns. They own and operate the grid. So we need to let them easily deploy their smart grids And these smart grids, in the times of crisis, if they operate as if they can operate as semi-autonomous, they can be multiple points which would not fade away if the large grid, if the Ukrenergo grid, local distribution grid system goes away, if it's being bombed. So of course you can bomb several points in the large electricity system, but you cannot bomb everyone. And that means we need to invest in creating small systems and creating good rules. Of course, we're having troubles with developing good rules in Ukraine, but we are working on them. So we need to create rules which would allow to create these local energy markets, which would play well with a large energy market. I think that's very critical. So that these two systems, so that we would not say, hey, look, there is a centralized system which should exist and cover everything, and there are these shady, murky, decentralized, which no one knows how it works. My idea is we need to make them work together and support each other, so that there would be a good, viable business model here and there, and then we will see the resilient energy system with a very diverse energy business models. And well, I do hope I will see it. And Russia will never have enough missiles, to take it down if there are many of them. Thank you.